Hey guys, this is Tyler here, and I'm going to talk with everyone about a topic here. And I've spoken a bit about this area a bit before, and what it is what you should consider if you're one of those guys or gals that's looking at relocating or obtaining a citizenship or residency for a very tiny country, whether it's a landmass country like here in Estonia, or it's like a Caribbean island, or it's just simply a tiny country, any type of very small country, and things that you have to consider if you're going to relocate to this type of country. And as we know here, some of the real small countries, they don't have a lot of areas where they can make a lot of their GDP. And essentially what they have to do is they rely heavily on certain service sectors such as banking and property markets and offshore tax structures for corporations to incorporate there and pay very low taxes. These are very common areas with real small countries. And I think one of the first countries or a few countries that kind of saw the potential with this type of situation was like Switzerland, Luxembourg, Ireland. These were some of the first major countries that I think many people started realizing and in recognizing that these countries were able to make a lot of GDP from these types of sectors with having very small populations, not having large like manufacturing and large natural resources in their country. I mean, these countries do certainly have something to offer, and if countries can do well by having this type of economy, that's awesome. Or maybe it's having a big tech sector or something. It's cool. Here in Estonia, I think they really try capitalizing first on the banking and financial sector, and then they transition over to tech sector, which kind of worked. Unfortunately, I think it was better designed for larger companies or medium-sized companies that already had successful businesses that were simply expanding. I don't think for actual startups per se it was the best system. Now, with that being said though, I will admit that if you go on to like Startup Estonia, this is the program, it was like the government program that sponsored this. There's many companies listed on this page, and many of these companies are making a great deal of profit, but I still don't think it was as successful by this point as they anticipated it to be. But pointing cases at countries such as Estonia, among other places, realized that as very micro-sized countries, they could capitalize on these types of sectors because they were very limited with other areas like manufacturing, I mentioned, or natural resources, any type of sector that required large population size. It was out of the picture, out of the question. Many of these real small countries that will say around 2 million people do typically offer these kind of services or products because they are very limited. And some countries do it phenomenally well. They've capitalized very well and really have seen the potential. I think the Caribbean islands are a prime example. The Caribbean, one of their biggest like international income that they make is from like foreign income or foreign corporations or foreign passports, foreign residencies. Very common. I mean, we look at places like St. Kitts or any Caribbean island. I think Grand Cayman for a while, and then it transitioned to other places that were better, like St. Kitts. Small Caribbean islands are fantastic to get like a second passport. Consider here though that just because you can get a passport doesn't mean it's a great place to live. Big difference here. Also realize that you can certainly get a passport if you want to improve your tax situation and still live somewhere else, have a better home base. And I mean, you have the document for this country. Of course, there are other considerations. If you're still holding a passport that has kind of an entrapment to it, like a U.S. passport or something, yeah, I mean, you're probably going to have to get something sorted with that passport. The like Caribbean passport, especially like the past year, the whole situation we've seen, this may be the passport that allows you to travel, that allows you to open other bank accounts, that allows you to visit family or friends. Your home passport, if you're holding like a US or Canadian or English passport, it may not work. Australian passport. And having this could be a great substitute so that you can do those types of things. And I think people this year have really realized that. Real tiny countries even actually can be more advantageous in times like right now with how these economies and countries were all shutting down, and the passports were very ineffective for traveling to many countries. And even now, like when you look at European Union, a lot of passports worldwide, people can't get into these countries. And I don't know how long it's going to be until maybe permanent, and they may introduce some kind of visa requirement or something like what Russia has in the future. But there are other things you have to keep in mind with really tiny countries, and they certainly shouldn't be overlooked. If you're a guy that, whether you want to date, have any kind of relationship, you want to have a good network of friends, anything of this nature, and you could be very limited. I say this coming from a smaller country, not super small, not like some of the Caribbean islands, but pretty small, under 2 million people. It's very limiting what you have in regards to relationships. And also remember here, you may not care about dating and relationships and marriage, but guys that you're around, they may want a girlfriend or want a wife or something like this. And for that reason, it's going to be probably much more limited than the kind of guys that come to those countries to live permanently, that reside there. You're going to have a much smaller pool of possible friends that you can find, because you and one other guy may be MGTOW, but all the other guys are maybe seeking wives or seeking long-term relationships, and they're probably going to be in other countries finding that. So potential like social network pool is going to be much smaller. And also note that in terms of diversion and possible activities and enjoyment in that particular location, even certain foods may be very limited what you have accessible, especially when you're looking at Caribbean islands. You could be there may not be a lot of options there. It make it kind of unpleasant for long term, and you have to consider that. If you're in a position where you're simply using this document, this passport or residency to travel for banking, for business, residency and tax purposes, that's probably a phenomenal setup there. And I have been working with clients, and I have advised them to I've very strongly considered obtaining a Caribbean passport. And I won't say which place I myself am looking at, but eventually I actually do plan on obtaining a Caribbean passport as part of my passport and residency portfolio. I'm anticipating it happening in a few years at the most, but it can serve a lot of purpose. And so for these types of things, I think it would be very useful. Now, there are other tiny countries that maybe aren't as bad as Caribbean islands, maybe like places like Taiwan, or it could be Israel for some people. These places might be better, but remember that often the larger countries around them, or countries that have very strong alliances, can have lots of influence on these countries. So if you're, say, trying to escape a certain jurisdiction, or you just don't want to have any affiliation with a certain system, this could be a potential problem, because often these real small countries have a lot of influence, and there's a lot of there can be headaches on this and that you'll have to deal with. You have to look at those countries as who they're allied with and what their outlook on the world is, because this will play into their policies of the country and what the situation could be like for you down the road. As I was saying, I think these real small countries, they can pair very well with say a larger country, even if it's just a residency of a larger country. I have an acquaintance of mine, he's living in Taiwan, and he's about to get a permanent residency document at the end of this year, and he's going to leave and go to Europe. He has desire to live long-term in Europe, but he wanted to get that residency document so that he could use it for banking and for business, for tax purposes. And he still likes traveling to Asia. He has kind of a home base there. And this is another thing to remember, is that like people who come from like Australia, or I think it's going to happen also in the US, where people won't leave, they'll shut the borders. If you have a document, preferably a passport, even a permanent residency document, you'll have something so you're not stuck in your home country. The most preferable is the passport, because if you have a passport, even if it's not a great country, you can probably get a visa to many other places and could still travel. Now, if you're relying on, say, like a Australian passport, or down the road like a UK passport, English passport, this could be a huge problem. If you want to travel, you want to go someplace, you may not be able to travel at all, and then you'll be kind of out of luck. And as I tell people, what does it matter if the travel supposedly it's visa free for 150 plus countries, but if that's not accessible anymore, if most of those countries you can't even enter, then it really doesn't matter anyhow. You may just be better off picking a country that isn't ranked as high, doesn't have as much visa-free access, but at least you can travel. You can move around a bit with that type of document. And also remember, real small countries, I know this from living in Estonia, generally political relations on a government level with other countries, it's pretty smooth, pretty low-key. Diplomatic-wise, there's not a lot of issues. So usually obtaining like those visas to go to other places is not a big deal. Usually you can access them, you'll be able to obtain them. Real small countries generally also don't just totally shut down their borders like you see in places like Australia. That's another big plus of having it, whether it's residency or a passport in one of these kind of countries. These aren't the kind of matters that these places worry about. They have other things that are more pressing. And I also think that the real small countries have kind of a more libertarian, laissez-faire aspect to them. If you like very low key, very quiet, people and government aren't going to be really disturbing you, you're not going to have these kind of issues, they work quite well. And not for everyone, but for some people, they're a great option. If anyone here has any questions, any inquiries, consultation, contact me and give me your comments in the video below. Thank you.